This might be the nerdiest thing I've ever done. We don't talk about that. Hi friends! I am about to start the most daunting, if not the biggest, costume project I've ever done. Twice a year there is a local Comic-Con that my dear friend Catherine and I attend together, and usually we coordinate our outfits so that we are from the same universe. It's always a great time, lots of fun, but this time we thought we would step it up a little. We have somehow convinced ourselves and come to the conclusion that we should enter the cosplay competition, which is not something I've ever done before. I have entered a cosplay into a sewing competition, but not actually done a cosplay competition, so I am a bit nervous about that. I am also very nervous because the character I've decided to cosplay is from Star Wars, and in general, Star Wars cosplayers are known for being very talented and very detail-oriented, so I feel like I have really big shoes to fill. I've decided to cosplay Padmé Amidala. Trash day. That's gonna be loud. He's the trash man. Mr. Trash Man. Take all my trash. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, I think he's far enough away. I will be making the Veranda Nightgown, which is this beautiful steel blue silk nightgown that she wears in Revenge of the Sith. I think my biggest goal for this cosplay is going to be screen accuracy. I figure if I'm putting this much work into it, I'm going to try and enter the Rebel Legion. They are known for having very high standards when it comes to screen accuracy. So that's my challenge for myself. We'll see what I can do. This cosplay is going to use a lot of techniques I've never used before. It's going to use 3D modeling and printing. It's going to use wig work. I'm going to try and do some makeup to change up my facial features and look a little more like hers. We'll see. It also involves a lot of hand stitching, where if you know me at all, you know I'm not the biggest fan of hand stitching. So I think this is really going to be a fun opportunity to try and improve a lot of skills. I am going to be making the pattern for this gown myself. So before I get into that, I'll go ahead and show you some of the photos of the actual gown and kind of show you why I picked the certain design elements that I'm going to be putting into mine. So let's get started. Alrighty, for the pattern. The Rebel Legion website has requirements for all of their costumes listed, and the first construction detail they have listed is that the dress is cut on the bias. Now, I'm going to drape this to get the exact curve, but from pictures, I think the edge is what is on the bias, not necessarily the center. And then it'll have these panels, which I'm going to cut out after cutting out the main piece. There's some contention on the cape on whether it's all one big piece or if it's two separate pieces. I happen to think that it's two separate pieces. So those are going to look something like this. The general consensus is that it's a waterfall shape that's then folded up, and I might mess around with a few other shapes like that, but we'll start with the waterfall and go from there. I think on the back, the way you can see some kind of, not necessarily pleating, but draping going on down the back, I think it's two pieces that connect to the shoulders and then in the middle. We never actually see the back in the movie or in any of the promo pictures. The back pattern piece that they made from the commercial pattern that came out a while ago is kind of bonkers. It does not seem comfortable at all, but it doesn't look comfortable. I've never seen this gown in person. I can't guarantee you what it looks like, but since you don't see it, since literally nobody is ever going to see it because it's under all of that hair, I'm gonna do my pattern piece a little different, just so it's nice and comfy. And I think that will be something like that. And I think it's a lot narrower than the front piece, so that it's still flattering on the back and shows off the cape really well, but the front piece stays voluminous. That's my opinion. Now, I can't guarantee any of this. I've never seen it in person. I don't even have the commercial pattern, but this is my best guess of what it looks like. This is all a guess, the back here, because you don't see it, but this garment looks uncomfortable enough to wear to bed as a nightgown. Why make it worse? So that's what I got. Here is the fabric I'm going to use. It was my favorite price, free. A friend of mine had leftovers when she finished a project she was working on, and I said, I will take that, yes please. So we did a little trade, something from my stash and this from hers. One side is this shiny satiny, and the other side is nice and matte, which is perfect. That's exactly what I need. It is a little brighter than I thought it was when she sent me the picture of it, so I am going to have to dye it. I picked up this from Joann. I got 2 bottles because that's all they had, so I hope it's enough. It's the Dye More Synthetic. Unfortunately, with the synthetic, you do have to do the boiling pot on the stove method. You can't do it any other way. It has to maintain that heat level. So since I'm working with a limited amount here, I only have this much fabric, which is actually, don't know exactly how much it is. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about a little over 5 yards, 5 and maybe a half. So since I'm working with a limited amount of fabric and I have to cut it into small enough chunks that it will fit on my dye pot on the stove, I am gonna pattern out the dress first, and then I can cut it to the lengths that I'll need to cut the pattern pieces out of. So I'm gonna work on my pattern first, and then I'm gonna dye it. This is the Dye More Synthetic in the color Smoky Blue. So I'm hoping it just gives it a little bit of a deeper, more gray blue tone. To start making the pattern, first I made my dress form as close to my measurements and height as I possibly could, and then I started draping using this thrifted sheet I had left over from another project. At the hem, I just did a total hack job because at this point I really only needed the general length, not the exact length. And then I did the same steps on the back, just marking and pinning as I go. I did end up changing this shape a little bit, but not too much. After I had my pattern pieces ready and knew the lengths of fabric I would need to cut for the dye bath, I decided to do a test dye just so I could get the coloring right. I tried to make this aesthetic, it was impossible. Good soup. Here's my test piece. This is before dyeing, this is after dyeing, and dyeing just gave it that deeper kind of gray tone to get that steel blue color. So I'm really, really happy with this, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest now. You know, I picked a hobby that really uses a lot of math for somebody who never was good at or liked math. I just spent 3 hours dyeing fabric, and I am so tired. But I still need to iron all of this before I can start cutting and sewing. And that is going to be the worst. Just the worst. Alrighty, the last few clips sounded weirdly nice, so I didn't want to ruin them with a voiceover. I'll catch you up on what I was doing real quick. I cut out the front pattern piece from my blue fabric and also cut strips of this tan to act as backing for my hand stitching. I only cut 1 panel so far just to make sure that it would actually work before committing to the whole thing. Then I started my hand stitching down the front of the gown. This stitch I'm using is called a bridging stitch. It's also historically called faggoting, but use of that term has become less popular. Once I knew that the concept of cutting the panels like this would work, I used washi tape to lay out my placement and make sure I liked where everything was going to go, but also make sure that my lines would be straight. I finished the inside seams of this part with my serger just to make sure everything would be nice and neat, and then I started stitching. And stitching. And stitching. Listen, I watched a lot of Survivor. I made it through at least 2 seasons. I did have help. It wasn't very helpful help, but it was help. It's really late at night. I am technically done with all of the hand stitching on this part of the gown, but you can see here, I'm so tired. You can see this is the middle one is the first one I did, and I did that one before I really figured out the tension. I was pulling my bridging stitch just a little bit too tight, and you can see that in like this puckering here that the other ones don't have, and these look so much better. So I'm going to try pressing it out to see if I can just kind of smooth it out a little, but if I can't, I'm gonna have to go through and cut some of these threads and loosen it up and then restitch the spaces, which is going to be a bummer because I'm done, but maybe I'm not. So yeah, I'm gonna try and press it out and we'll see. So obviously based on my face, it did not press out well, and I gave myself a small moment to have a pity party, and then I started taking it out and of course stitching it all back in again. I am finally done. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to loosen the threads. I did have to cut them out and completely re-sew that section, but I'm very glad I did it. I think it looks a lot better than it did, and after I give it a press, I'm really excited to finally move forward, and so far I think it looks great, so I'm happy. Finally being able to move forward, it was time to cut out the other main pieces of the dress. So that included the back piece here, which I did make sure to add seam allowances in all of the areas where I needed to add them. And that also included the back facing and the front facing, which I didn't originally pattern out because they're just the same pieces as the front and back pattern pieces, just a bit shorter. I decided to overlock the seam allowance along the front hand stitching because it had the cotton to reinforce it, but for these side seams I decided to do a French seam since the fabric did fray a lot and the fabric was a little slippery. I thought it would help reduce puckering. Alrighty, last night I sewed the facings in. I just kind of put it on my dress form because I wanted to see where I'm at right now. It's looking pretty good. There's obviously a lot I still have left to do. This is what the back looks like. So the pleat is here. I'll probably have to tack it down in a couple places, but I'm gonna get the wings on and see where I want to do that. I really like the shape of this. I'm glad I went with this instead of something else. So for right now, my plan is to understitch everything so that the lining doesn't show, because right now it's obviously, you know, pulling and showing away in a way I don't want it to. And then I'm going to make the straps and sew those where they need to go. And then I can start on the wings. So just keep moving along. To make the 6 straps, I cut thin bias strips from scraps of the front and back pieces, and then I used a tube turner to just turn them right side out. I pressed them so they would be flat and the seam would be on the underside and not visible. Then I pinned them in place and stitched them in. Patterning the capey, wingy things took way longer than I expected it to. I won't show you the 12 million versions I went through here, but trying to get them to match up to how I saw them on the screen took a lot of time and a lot of adjustment. This is what I finally settled on, and I am very happy with it. This is what the pattern piece looks like pinned to my dress form without seam allowance. Next come the accessories, which there are a lot of because Padmé has a flair for the dramatic in everything she wears, including this literal nightgown. There are 2 pearl details on the back of the cape, and to make these, I thrifted 2 pairs of earrings and used needle nose pliers to bend the hook from the dangle earrings into a circular shape. Then I was able to slide those onto the stud earrings so they would have the look and movement of the pearl details from the movie. To connect the pearls to the cape, I put the stud through the stitching that holds the two sides of the cape together, and then I put a generous bead of Gorilla Glue onto the stud. I used the back and pushed that back into place firmly and held it there until the glue was set. The pearl details that go along the shoulder, I did have to string by hand, and I strung these onto a stretchy cord so that as I moved my arms around or got in and out of the dress, it didn't snap these cords. My friend Dan was a huge help for this project. He found super detailed reference images to 3D model this brooch and print it. I had never worked with 3D printing before. Once again, using Gorilla Glue, I used that to stick these pieces together. At this point, it was looking fantastic and exactly like the movie except for the color. So I used this metallic Rust-Oleum to spray paint it in short, even strokes. And I also used that same paint for the crown, which you can see here. Once again, this was made with the help of Dan. While the paint on those were drying, I decided to start styling the hair extensions. I got these extensions from Amazon and they were actually a surprisingly good quality for the price. It looks crazy, but I found that the best way to do this was by sticking them to my fridge using magnets and then curling from there. To make the curls, I did a wet set, so I sprayed the hair with water and then used my foam rollers to roll them up. This did work, but I think next time I would try to do a steam set since it took a really long time to dry this way.
Okay, not to be too dramatic, but this is actually really hard.
Once the spray paint on the crown was dry, I went back in with this acrylic paint in a darker color to create some dimension. I did this doing kind of a wet brush technique where I got my paintbrush wet, dipped that into the paint, and then kind of smeared it everywhere where there could possibly be some kind of weathering. Then I used a paper towel to just kind of roughly brush it off, not taking all of the paint away, but a lot of it. I did the same treatment to the brooch. I found literally the perfect blue suede shoes at the thrift store, so of course I picked those up. The only thing I didn't like about them was that they had these leather straps on the front, so I just covered those up with pearls. The brooch has a matte backing to it that's the same color as the rest of the dress, so to achieve that, I once again used my handy dandy Gorilla Glue and traced the outline of the brooch and also some key points in the middle. Then I flipped it over to attach that to the wrong side of my fabric so that it would be a bit matte and pressed it down. Using my snips, I cut as closely to the edge as I possibly could without cutting the brooch, and then since this is a synthetic fabric, I used some flame to just singe the edges and melt them a bit so that there wouldn't be any stray flyaways. I would do this in a well-ventilated area if you were going to attempt something like this. To finish up the crown, I attached some hair clips, and this is what it looks like on, but obviously not styled. And with some last tacks to make sure the pleat stays nicely in place on the back, this cosplay is ready to go.
I'm Katie. I have a friend recording somewhere for my friends and family who couldn't make it here today, and my kids. This cosplay has been an absolute labor of love for me. I spent so long on it, but it is not just a costume for me. This is not a fake belly. My husband and I are very happy to announce that we are expecting a new baby Bower due in October.
Do you have something to say, sir? Interesting. Well, there you have it, folks.